Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our final day of Secret Path Week events. As we gather today, we are reminded that throughout Canada, we are situated on Indigenous lands, both ceded treaty land and unceded land. This land is steeped in rich Indigenous history and a home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. As a country, we have a responsibility for the stewardship of the land on which we live and work. So today I acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the neutral people on whose territory I broadcast from right now. This is my name's Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. I run an organization called Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. We're all about bringing science, exploration, adventure, and conservation live into classrooms across North America and beyond. So if you've never joined us before, check out exploringbytheseat.com, where you can find a ton of events for your classrooms to join each and every month. So this is our third year collaborating with the Downie and Chanie Wenjack Fund to bring Indigenous leaders, artists, and scientists live to classrooms across Canada. We've got an incredible week on the go right now with 20 live events, including musical performances, language lessons, storytelling, and so much more. The Downie and Chanie Wenjack Fund is part of musician Downie's legacy and embodies his commitment and that of both the Downie and Wenjack families to build cultural understanding and create a path towards reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. The goal of the Downie Wenjack Fund is to continue the conversation that began with Chanie Wenjack's residential school story and to support the reconciliation process through awareness, education, and action. Now, many of the classrooms who are joining us live today are already doing something, are already working towards reconciliation as legacy schools. So if you've never heard of the Legacy Schools program, it's a free national initiative to engage, empower, and connect students and educators to further reconciliation through awareness, education, and action. So you can visit downiewenjack.ca to find all of that information, to sign your school, your classroom up. You'll be sent a kit, and it's a great program. Already hundreds and hundreds of actions of reconciliation have taken place in classrooms, communities, homes. So do take some time to visit that website. All right. Well, we have a great event in store. I'm really excited to be welcoming Harriet Visitor to join us today. She is the niece of Chanie Wenjack and an experienced educator and community leader who's continuously striving to improve outcomes for youth. So she has over 30 years of experience working in and advocating with and for First Nation communities in education and social development. She's worked in the federal, the provincial, and private school systems in Canada, and she's been a leader in the development of the Secret Path curriculum that has been distributed right across the country. So I'm going to bring Harriet in live with us now. Good morning, Harriet. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm doing well, thank you.
All right. Well, it's an absolute pleasure to see you. We have a great group of classrooms joining us on camera, even more classrooms joining us via YouTube. So we're looking forward to getting to know you a little better, hearing a little bit of your story this morning.
Perfect. Okay. Before I begin, I would like to take this time to acknowledge that I am coming from Treaty 3 territory. The school I'm in is situated on the traditional land of the Lag-Sioux First Nation. And I think it's important to recognize that. Briefly, before coming on, my classroom, my window, I oversee the schoolyard. And I see students that are walking with their teacher right now, are walking my Uncle Chanie home. And I see them walking, and it really hit me in the heart to see them walking. My late uncle would have been about their age. Okay, so I'm going to share by just want to make sure, sorry. Are you able to see my presentation?
Yes, we can, Harriet. If you just hit the little option at the bottom to go full screen, that little, yeah, there you go.
Yes. Okay.
Perfect.
So my discussion today that I wanted to talk about, and I often tell my students that we're natural born storytellers from the time we're very young to the time we're older. We're always wanting to share stories. So I thought I would share this as my journey on the secret path. So my name is Harriet Visitor, and I am the niece of the late Chanie Wenjack. And I remember when my secret path journey began, I would say. It began in 2016 with Gord and his brothers and others that came to Ogoki Post, which is the home community of Chanie and his sisters. If you will, I'm not sure if you can see, this here is my Aunt Annie. This is my Aunt Evelyn, my mom, who is the matriarch of our family, and my Aunt Pearl. These are Chanie's surviving sisters today. And in the back, you'll see Gord and Pat and Mike, my cousin Sunset. I call my Cree princess Kira, and my son Jared. So I remember, and this is me, I remember when Gord came to Ogoki, I didn't realize that that was going to be the beginning of my journey with Secret Path. I brought my children with me during the visit when he came to Ogoki because I thought it was so important that my children walk this journey with me, because it's not only my journey, but it's also their journey as well. And I remember when we were in Ogoki and I heard Gord, I'd say for decades I had waited to hear my Uncle Chanie's story. My mom would share little bits and pieces here, and I would ask. And, you know, when you're asking a question from your parents and you know when it's time to, you know, just wait. So I knew I had to wait. I remember a time when my mom took my son, and he might have been the age of my daughter, maybe younger in this picture. We went to the Cecilia Jeffrey Indian Residential School in Kenora. And I remember, we didn't talk, but I remember my mom, and I remember seeing my son running the grounds a bit. And I didn't ask a whole lot of questions. I just knew not to ask questions then. So I waited. I waited for a long time for my mother to share my Uncle Chanie's story and her story. And I remember when we were in Ogoki and we were at the nursing station in a room, and Gord was there, and his brothers were there, and we were sitting around, and then I began to hear my late Uncle Chanie's story. I sat on the floor because at that point, the educator in me became the student. And I was soaking everything from my eyes and my ears and my heart, just being prepared and ready to hear the story. So when Gord came and he shared my Uncle Chanie's story with us, and if you're not really familiar with the events of what started the Secret Path, Gord wrote 10 poems. You know, as an artist, you know, he writes down his words, his heart. You know, he was so moved by an article that Mike had given him, his brother Mike had given him, that was in Maclean's magazine, and written by Ian Adams. And Gord was so moved by it in many ways. One of them being the fact that he'd never heard the story and was just so moved by it that why hasn't he? Why was he never taught about this in school? And it hit him. So he began to write out. He researched, obviously, because he's, you know, he did a lot of research on my uncle and the story in residential schools. And so he wrote these 10 poems, and he got together with his friends, and they wrote the music for the Secret Path. And then he had another friend that came in and did graphic novel, the visual for it. And so began the Secret Path. This is my Uncle Chanie's story. And I look at this picture, and this is a picture that everyone sees. And it's the only picture that I've seen of him for some time, was this picture. And I had so many questions about who he is. You know, I think of my Uncle Chanie, and I think if he's anything like my mom and her sisters, then I know I would have loved him. I never had the opportunity to meet him, and all I had was this picture to try and connect with. Then came the Secret Path with the graphic novel, the concerts, and I was able to see a visual of what he would be like in person, to see him walking. And I remember watching it for the very first time in Ottawa, and my heart was just full, was broken. It was just all over the floor, I'd say. But it gave me something visual, physical to look at. It gave me a connection that I wanted. And I remember at that point saying, this is the uncle that I never had an opportunity to meet, and I so wanted to meet him. And so I gave myself, from that point on, it was my time to mourn this uncle that I never got a chance to know, and that I began to hear about through the stories of my mom and her sisters and through Gord. So began my journey with Secret Path, and I didn't realize that. I remember the very first time, and I've known who Gord was, because of the Tragically Hip. I remember hearing, we were coming back on a James Bay highway, and I think we were in Val-d'Or or Amos. I can't remember which community we were in. But my husband says, I want to catch the concert. So we turned the television on, and there was Gord. We turned it on right as he was basically putting a call out, pouring out his heart to the Prime Minister and the rest of Canada on national television about how so much of First Nation people he did not know, and that there was such a lack of knowing and understanding who we were. And when he did that, I stood there. I remember standing there as I'm watching him say to the camera and to the rest of Canada, and I thought, he acknowledged me as an Indigenous woman, as a mother, as an educator, and as a survivor. And in that acknowledgement, I felt such a sense of respect coming from him. And I was curious. I began to be more curious about who is this man? And little did I know that later on, I would begin, like a month later, that I would meet him in person, and my Secret Path journey would begin. And I want to talk a little bit about where it began and how it began, I guess. I was teaching, and I still am, under the Keewatin and Patricia District School Board. And the school I was teaching in was Carlancia Public School, a community where my mom resides in. They became the first legacy school in 2018. They actually, during this time as well, established the Chanie Wenjack Native Language Award that they, from then on, been given to students every year. So it was at this time I was an Ojibwe teacher as well as a half-time kindergarten teacher. So these are our students, and they always hold a special place for me, being the first legacy school in I'm just it just reminds me of everything that I've gone through in the support that I've been given through the school board and my students in my journey with Secret Path. I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey before I go on to this. Sorry. I want to talk about the fact of being an educator. When I became an educator, I say that my son, Jared here, is the reason I became a teacher. I understood the influence of teachers and educators on our children. And so it was always important to me to have a connection with every single teacher that he's had, and to acknowledge and honor the influence and the teaching that they have been given throughout the years. I think it's so important because as educators, we have a huge influence, an important influence on educating our students. And my daughter, Kira, here, I say, is the how I teach. When I look through the lens of my daughter, I'm looking through her eyes. And I know that my daughter sees the world and people through her heart. She always has, and she still does. And so I'm always very aware of why I teach and how I teach, and the influence that I have on my students. So I want to talk a little bit about the Legacy School program. And like Joe mentioned, it's a free national initiative to engage, empower, and connect students and educators to further reconciliation through awareness, education, and action. We have toolkits that are designed to engage students, our students as well as staff and community. We have booster kits. We have a lot of different resources that are within each of the toolkits, like the flag and the starter kit. And we have many different resources within. We have a reconciliation guide. We have bracelets and pins and stickers and the 94 calls to action booklet that's down here. So we have many, many different resources there at within our legacy schools. So from here, I want to discuss a little bit about my story a little bit in coming here before I discuss this. I often share a story of when Gord passed away. When Gord passed away in 2017, I had been going to see my Aunt Pearl and family. My cousin Kathy, Pearl's only daughter, had passed away. And we had left Pickle Lake, and I was about a half an hour out of Thunder Bay when I received word that Gord had passed, and I wept. I cried. And I remember going to arriving in Thunder Bay at the funeral home. And up to that time, I had tried many times to hug my mother. My cookum passed, and her youngest sister passed, and my nephew and nieces that have passed, and loved ones that have passed. And my mother would never hug me. She would freeze up whenever I tried to hug her. But I always tried. I always had hope, that my mom would hug me. But as I got older, I began to understand that something very terrible had happened to my mother at residential school that caused her to have a disconnect with that physical touch of hugging her children. And many times I would feel hurt, but I began to understand that there was a reason why my mom couldn't hug me, but I would still try. I never gave up hope. And when I walked into the funeral home, my mother actually greeted me on the day that Gord passed. And she hugged me. I was surprised. I didn't expect her to hug me. But when she did hug me, I was so thankful, and I thanked Gord, because I knew then that the healing was going to happen in our family, in my mother's life. That hug was like 4 years ago. And it's not uncommon for residential school students to have this disconnect and not hugging. And I've had some friends that have reached out to me, and I would encourage them, just stay hopeful, be hopeful, because you will get your hug. When I think of my Uncle Chanie story and Gord, from then on, I just, would tell myself that I was always going to be open and willing to share Secret Path, my connection, my story with the Secret Path. Because I knew that hug alone has meant so much to me in my life. And it shows me the growth and healing that's happening within our families, which I carry with me all the time. And when I share my Uncle Chanie story, I often talk about carrying Gord's heart, and his heart to educate all Canadians on the true history of Canada. It pertains to residential schools. So now I'm still working for the Kuwaitan Patricia District School Board at Sioux Mountain Public School. And our school this year, my principals this year, have started a new initiative, a legacy school project. I work with Sharon Demonsky, who is our family support worker for the school. So as a legacy school, we have wanted to continue our learning throughout the whole year, right? It just doesn't start October 17 and end October 22, but it's throughout the whole year. And so this project, using the Secret Path and other resources that you can find on the Downie Wenjack Fund, with culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy. So basically what we want to do is we provide supports, and we invite guests and knowledge keepers and elders into the classrooms to connect students and educators with themselves, basically, with the story, with who they are. So it's the feedback and everything that we've gotten so far has been enormous, and to see the connections that the students are making and the interest and the participation that we get from students and staff is enormous. To this, I think is what Gord's call to do something is. It just reminds me that we have a responsibility, or a willingness to be able to be part of his call to action to do something. And this is my school boards, specifically my Sioux Mountain Public School. This is our initiative in that call to do something. So what I'd like to do from here is to go back to where I am. I'm always thankful to be able to speak to you all, and to come to speak about my connection, my journey with the Secret Path, with what we're doing as an educator. I understand that it has become, since May, it has become a very difficult and hard topic. As educators, we speak and discuss those very difficult discussions and topics with our students. And I know, and I felt it when we were online last May, when so much of the uncovering of children were found. I felt it coming into a school when we have been in teaching online for, we haven't had a full year for a couple of years now. So I understand just as an educator what we go through and the supports that we need from our fellow educators in this journey. I just recently spoke at a high school, Sioux North, and I was sharing with them 2 quotes. And that education got us into this mess, and education will get us out of it. Justice Murray Sinclair's quote. And a quote that my husband shared with me, and that no one understands us better than ourselves. And I reminded our students, or the students, that I understand that our history is one of pain, and I feel it too, and I know they feel it too. We come from a time of no choices, and not being able to make those choices for ourselves, and having choices made for us, and the impacts that it has had on us, and still has it still has on us. To now we have the ability to make those choices. So I'm always thinking about how I can provide this, a teaching and a lesson for my students. I tell them that I understand that it is painful, and I acknowledge when I'm sharing with them the pain that they feel and the different emotions that they feel when they're hearing the secret path. But I also remind them that we come from strong, resilient people. And why do I know that? Because I'm looking at you. You're here. My journey, or my influence, or my responsibility as an educator is to walk that journey with you. And when it's time, you'll continue on. You're going to continue our story. And I remind them of that often. We're strong, we're resilient people, and we will continue walking together. And I tell my students and any students I speak that this story, my Uncle Chanie story, is not just my Uncle Chanie's story, but it's the story of 150,000 Indigenous children who were taken away to residential schools. And that's 300,000 set of parents and 600,000 set of grandparents, and the enormity of that. And that this story, this history, is not just my history, but it's your history too, as Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And that we have the ability to make the choice to do something, to create awareness, understanding within and to our students. So I'm really thankful that I can come here today, and if you have any questions, I hope I can answer your questions for you. Thank you, Joe.
All right, Harriet. Well, thank you so much. I know it's not easy to share that family history, but I'm really grateful that you are able to, and I think it's part of your healing process, and I think it's part of our process as a country to hear these stories gathered together like this. So thank you so much for sharing with us today, Harriet.
Thank you. I guess one thing I'd like to add a little bit about tomorrow. I'm actually going to be attending a ceremony or an event that's happening at the site of the Cecilia Jeffrey Indian Residential School in Kenora. They're going to do an event in honor of my Uncle Chanie, and that today is actually 55 years to the day of his passing, and that we're going to meeting with all of his sisters tomorrow, and also other family members that are traveling today to attend that event in Treaty 3 territory.
All right. Well, I say that we bring in a few classrooms and, see what they're thinking, see if they have a couple questions. To the groups who are joining us via YouTube, if you have some questions, please share those questions in the chat. So let's see. Mrs. Reddy is joining us, and she has some grade 5-6 students joining her today. They are joining us from Dryden, Ontario. So I'm going to bring them into the call here. Hey, grade 5-6s, how are we doing today? There they are.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
I believe, Carly, do you want to kind of show yourself and ask your question? You could just stand up even, so they know it's you.
Yeah, nice and loud for us, Carly. Hi, Carly.
Have you been in a residential school?
She was wondering if Harriet ever had to attend a residential school.
Actually, I did. I did attend a residential school north of Pickle Lake, Ontario. I did.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you for that question from our grade 5-6s in Dryden. I think are you near Dryden? I think that's where
Actually,
it showed up.
about an hour away.
About an hour away. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, let's bring in another group with us and grab a question. Mr. Glassford's group, they're in Rockwood, Ontario, grade 7 class. I'm going to bring Mr. Glassford in. Morning, Mr. Glassford.
Mr. Glassford. Hello. How's it going, Harriet and Joe?
Good.
Thanks for joining us today.
Yes, thank you for having us. Okay, we have a few different questions, but Taryn, do you want to ask your question?
Yes.
My question is, you just said you attended residential schools. My question is, what age did you attend or get taken to there?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
What?
He was wondering, Harriet, what age you were when you attended residential school.
I was 12 years old when I attended residential school.
All right. I'm going to bring in another group here who's joining us. Actually, there's just a comment here from YouTube, from Miss Murphy's class, and they're saying here we're walking all week for Chanie, and they're holding the flag to spread the word. So they just wanted to share. This is a class in Oshawa, Ontario, and they've been walking this week and spreading the word about Secret Path. So they wanted to share that via the chat today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for walking this journey with us, to you and your students.
All right. I'm going to pop to another classroom that's joining us here. Ms. Davidy's joining us. They are grade 4-5 students in Brampton. I'm going to pop them into the call. Hi, boys and girls. How are you?
Hi, thank you so much for this. Felix has a question. Felix, do you want to say it really loud?
So what was the name of your residential school that you went to? Like, does it even have a name? Like,
Sorry,
So
what was the name of the school I attended?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yes.
well, I actually attended two different schools. The first school would have been Popple Hill Residential School, which was north of Red Lake, and one north of Pickle Lake called Crystal Lake Residential School. So Popple Hill, I was there till Christmas. So it was like not a full year, but I actually attended two separate schools.
Okay. And Harriet, I wonder, you mentioned when you were talking a bit about your family, that you could just feel it wasn't the right time to hear your uncle's story, and you knew, to wait, and that it would come one day. Do you find now, after they met Gord and Secret Path and saw the impact that it is having across Canada, do you find that your family is, able to tell the story more, and that helps with the healing process than being able to share the story?
I believe so. I think that with Gord coming and the sharing of my Uncle Chanie's story, I think that it just opened a lot for I'm speaking for my immediate family, for my mom, and sharing of my Uncle Chanie's story and more of her story. And if you read in Tanya and Tangala's Seven Fallen Feathers is where I got the opportunity to read my dad's story, my late dad's story. My dad died before even disclosing his story. So I think it has helped in now we're having, not just because of my Uncle Chanie's story, but we have a lot of other stories that are coming out, and some stories will be heard and some stories will not be heard. But we do have a lot of families and a lot of students that are sharing of their stories now. And I think it's so important that we listen and hear their stories.
Absolutely. No question, Harriet. We're going to visit a class is joining us. We've got from St. Paul with Miss Roy, and they are a grade 5-6 class. They're in Peterborough. I'm going to bring them into the call now for a question. Hey, Peterborough, how are we doing?
And we're very sorry we missed part of the presentation because Mrs. Roy's computer just completely shut down.
Technology will do that.
Oh, that happens.
Yeah.
But we're still very interested and have a question for you.
Excellent.
Okay, Julian, do you want to come right up to the computer?
Sure.
Yep.
I have a question for Harriet.
Okay.
What was it like for you in residential school? Like,
My experience in residential school. I had very different experiences in both of the schools that I attended. I was quite lonely in one of the schools, well, both of the schools that I attended, but I guess I could say that physically, being physically punished was one of the first experiences I've ever had, and that happened at the residential school that I attended. That you never forget. So my experiences, I stay connected with some students from the schools, and I stay connected with some people that I've met there at the schools. But I think one of the lasting memories I have of the school is when I was physically punished.
Harriet, I know, it's not easy to think about those past experiences. So, I really do appreciate, and I know the students do as well, that you are sharing with us. And, they have lots of questions about the experience because I think they're really trying to understand, what it was like. And so thank you so much for, being willing to share some of those experiences with those classrooms today. We're going to take a little visit to Wendat Village in Stouffville, Ontario. There's some grade 5-6s joining us with Miss Joseph Holloway. Let me see if I can bring them in there. Wendat, are you there? All right, maybe they're not unable to unmute their mic, but a shout out to our group in Stouffville. Anyways, if you do have a question, put it in the chat and I'll keep an eye out for that question. Another question here, it's from YouTube, and it's Harriet. They're wondering, can you speak to the importance of today's children and students, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, to carry your family story forward?
I think it's important for us to carry the our whole story, and not just my family story, but like I said, my Uncle Chanie's story is just one of 150,000 stories out there. And I think it's important that we educate and become aware about the whole history of residential schools and the impacts, for us to understand the impacts and for us to become aware of our history in terms of where we come from, especially for Indigenous to understand, and non-Indigenous as to where we're going to go. So I think it's important that we all become part of the discussion with our residential school history, with our history of Indigenous people, with our Canadian history. I think it's very important.
Absolutely, no question. And I have a question here. I'm going to bring Miss Dabity back in. She's got a question for you as an educator. So I'm going to bring her back in so she can ask that question.
Hi, thank you. One of my students actually has the precursor to my question.
Sure.
Gabby, go ahead. So when did you become a teacher, Harriet?
Oh my. Okay. My career, I'm so thankful for my career. I first was teaching at a private school in Moose Factory Island. And I taught there for a couple of years. That's where I had the honor and blessing to be able to teach my son grade 1, teaching him at this private school. And it was called Moose Factory Academy of Christian Education. I taught him at that school. And then I went on to, that's when I desired to become a teacher. That's not initially what I was going to do, but I went to university and I homeschooled my son while going to school as well. So I'd homeschool him during the day and in the evening, go to school part-time. And then that's when I started being interested in Teachers College. And I believe in 2007-ish, I became a teacher. So I taught in federal schools. I taught in provincial schools. Now I taught in my husband's community in northern Quebec. I taught in a private school. And I homeschooled my son. So I've had such a rewarding career in being able to do that because I understand the importance of education because of the influence that educators have in the lives of our children. And I always am so mindful of that when I teach my students and the students that I've had over the years. I'm so mindful of the influence in my words and the terminology that I use in teaching my students.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And so the extension on that, which was the question I had, was as an educator of different age groups, how do you recommend that we bring these stories to, especially to our younger students? You know, that's one thing that some of us are challenged with as far as, you know, how much to share, what to share. So just, I mean, I know that this is a huge answer, I'm sure, but just maybe a few tips that you've used in regards to teaching our students and, you know, making it at their level.
I guess I can use it as an example of what I've done this year, because I mean, we're coming back this year after being out of school for 2 full years and looking at the mental health of our students. And even as us educators and understanding that, you know, we were teaching online, we started, and then in May, with the uncovering of the children that were found at these different residential schools. I mean, as educators, that hit me. You know, it was so hard for me to teach the next day after, knowing that I was carrying this lump inside of me. And being able to teach and knowing that my students, because we have those very difficult discussions and topics with our students, that, you know, they were looking for us to make sense of what they were seeing, make sense of what they were hearing, because that's our role in their lives as educators. Besides, we're an extension of their parents and how in the education component of what we do. So I understood that, and coming this year, I thought, what am I going to do with my students, my younger students, and understanding and looking at the Secret Path graphic novel. So this year, with my younger students, I looked at different aspects of what I wanted to make connections and rebuild within them. So we looked at the first day, we looked at names and the importance of names and where do our names come from and who named us, and looking at my Uncle Chanie's name and how we feel about our names and the importance of our name. It's that it's our foundation of who we are, and looking at that. The next day, we looked at a picture of my Uncle Chanie, and I said, what can we infer by looking at his picture? What characteristics do you see within him? So we started naming them. From his story, can we determine his characteristics are? And we looked at that. Then we started to look at ourselves. What are those things within our lives that our family and what we do helps us in terms of how we talk, why we talk, what we do. So we looked at those. And then we looked at the stranger, and then we looked at, we stopped and froze at the one picture where my Uncle Chanie's on the tracks. And I said, do you think my Uncle Chanie was alone? And of course they would say, yes, he was alone. No, he had two friends. I said, okay, so when he left his two friends, was he alone? And they said, yes, he was alone. I said, let me challenge you on that though, because my Uncle Chanie wasn't alone. He was in nature. So he had the trees and the rocks, right? We had the feeling of the wind, the sound of nature that's out there. But what else is in nature that we don't even see that's there within this picture? And then the animals. So then we started brainstorming what animals are around Northwestern Ontario that would have been around him. So I reminded him that many times when we go out in nature, in the bush, we're not alone. There's something about being out there that helps us, that heals us, that makes us feel good, that we need to be out there. And the animals too, always connecting them to the land, to themselves, to the animals. So that's the way I kind of approached it this year. And yes, we did talk about, they did have those questions they wanted to know, but I really took into consideration my younger students, how I was going to teach this story with them. I hope that answers your question. I think of their spirits all the time. I think of the influence we have. You know, we have something very painful, and I remind them that we're strong. We're all strong. This is why we're strong, because we're still here.
Right.
Right, and you're going to continue the story. So I think of many different things, but definitely I think of my students' spirits, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, when I'm teaching them.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, Harriet, one more message here from our group in St. Paul's. They want to say, thank you so much for speaking about your experience. We've learned about how hard this was, and we promise to continue learning. So we will remember you saying you never forget. So that's from our class from St. Paul's that was joining us today.
I just want to thank you, educators and students. You're an extension of our Downie and Wenjack families. And I want to thank you on behalf of them for walking this journey of reconciliation with us.
Absolutely. And I want to add to that a huge thanks to our YouTube classes who joined us today. Thank you for sending us in some great questions. Thank you to our camera classrooms. It was great to see the students. Thank you for sharing in Harriet's story today and asking your questions. And Harriet, first of all, thank you for being with us. Thank you for being so open to share about your uncle and your journey with the Secret Path. And I hope that your family has a good time, being together and remembering this weekend. And I remember a couple years ago I hosted, I believe Pearl joined us as well. And it was great to meet her and have you join us as well. So I hope your family's able to have a good time being together and remembering this weekend.
It will be. I so look forward to being with all the sisters. It's rare that they're all together and that I get to be together with them, supporting them. Absolutely.
All right. Well, again, we still have a couple more Secret Path Week events. Today, we're going to talk to Nancy Holman at 1 p.m. Eastern and learn a little bit of Cree together. And then we're going to wrap up the day with a musical performance from GR Grit at 2 p.m. Eastern. So do register for those events, and I'll make sure everybody has the links. But for now, thank you again, Harriet. It was great to see you today, and I hope you have a good weekend.
Bamapi, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.